The galaxy had been silent for 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Commander Zethkar of the Galactic Defense Coalition counted every hour since the last human transmission had echoed through space. The massive alien sat hunched over his command console aboard the fortress station Nexus Prime, his 6 arms working frantically across holographic displays that showed nothing but death and destruction. The Devourers had come from beyond the galactic rim, like a plague of metal and hunger. They consumed everything in their path, leaving behind only empty void where once thriving worlds had sparkled with life. Entire star systems simply vanished, their matter converted into fuel for the endless mechanical swarm that swept across the galaxy like a cosmic wildfire. Zethkar remembered the first days of the invasion. The Coalition had been confident, arrogant even. They commanded fleets of 1,000 species, technologies beyond imagination, weapons that could shatter moons. The humans had been their newest members, their ships crude and primitive compared to the elegant vessels of the Altarians or the living bioships of the Vexnari. Many had questioned why such a young, violent species deserved a place among the civilized races of the galaxy. But when the Devourers came, everything changed. The first battles had been disasters. Coalition fleets melted like ice before a star. The enemy adapted to every weapon, every tactic, every desperate strategy the Allied forces could devise. Planets fell daily, their populations fleeing deeper into Coalition space as the mechanical tide advanced relentlessly. Then Captain Sarah, Chen of the Terran vessel. Indomitable had proposed something that chilled even the most hardened military commanders. She wanted to take a small fleet of human ships into the deepest parts of Devourer-controlled space, beyond the edge of known reality, to find the source of the invasion and destroy it. The Coalition leadership had been horrified. It was suicide, they said. Madness. The humans would be throwing their lives away for nothing. But Chen had looked at them with those cold, determined eyes that humans got when they decided something needed to die. And she had spoken words that still haunted Zethkar's dreams. "We're the monsters you invited to your tea party," she had said quietly. "Now let us do what monsters do best." 18 human warships had departed Nexus Prime that day, ancient vessels by galactic standards, built from steel and composite materials, powered by fusion reactors that other species considered primitive. They carried crews of a few hundred each, tiny compared to the massive population of a Coalition dreadnought. But every human aboard those ships had volunteered for what they all knew was a one-way mission. The last transmission from the human fleet had come from the edge of Devourer space. Captain Chen's voice calm and steady despite the static. "Nexus Prime, this is Indomitable. We're crossing into the deep dark now. Tell our families we remembered how to be human." Chen out, then silence. For 3 years, the Coalition had continued fighting a losing war. They had retreated from system after system, world after world. The great fortress worlds of the Altarians had fallen. The sacred groves of the Sylvani had been consumed. The underwater cities of the Aquarians had been drained and devoured. Now only a handful of star systems remained under Coalition control, clustered around Nexus Prime like children hiding behind their parent. Refugee fleets crowded the space lanes, carrying the survivors of 1,000 dead worlds. Food was running short. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. The great shipyards that had once produced vessels for a galactic civilization now struggled to repair the battered remnants of the Coalition fleet. Zethkar touched a control on his console, bringing up the tactical display that showed the approaching Devourer fleet. Millions of mechanical ships, each one the size of a city, advancing in perfect formation toward the last free worlds in the galaxy. They would arrive in 6 days. The Coalition had perhaps a few thousand vessels left to defend against them. "Sir," called his aide, a young Vexnari whose bioship symbionts glowed with nervous energy. "Incoming transmission from the outer perimeter." "It's strange." "Strange how?" Zethkar rumbled, not looking up from the display showing their inevitable doom. "The signal is human, sir. Broadcasting on old Terran military frequencies." Zethkar's foreheart stopped beating. Slowly he turned to face his aide. "That's impossible. The humans have been gone for 3 years." "Yes, sir. But the signal is definitely human. Audio and visual. The identification codes match the vessel Indomitable." The command deck fell silent except for the hum of failing life support systems and the distant vibration of ship hulls under stress. Every being on the bridge turned to look at Zethkar, their alien features reflecting the same impossible hope that he felt rising in his chest. "Put it on the main display," he whispered. The holographic projector flickered to life, showing static and interference. Then the image cleared, revealing a human face that Zethkar recognized instantly. Captain Sarah Chen looked older, her dark hair now streaked with silver, deep lines carved around her eyes. Behind her, the bridge of the Indomitable was visible, but something was wrong with it. The walls seemed to move slightly, covered in strange patterns that hurt to look at directly. Equipment hummed with energies that shouldn't exist. "Nexus Prime, this is Captain Chen of the Terran vessel Indomitable," she said, her voice carrying through the speakers with perfect clarity, despite the impossible distance. "We've found them. We've found the source, and we've learned things that the galaxy wasn't ready to know." Chen paused, and for a moment her expression softened with something that might have been regret. "We're coming home now. We're bringing gifts. Tell all Coalition forces to clear the space between their positions and the advancing Devourer fleet. Tell them to find the deepest bunkers they can and wait for the screaming to stop." The transmission ended, leaving the command deck in absolute silence. Zethkar stared at the empty display, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The humans were alive. After 3 years in the depths of space that had driven other species mad just to contemplate, they were returning. But as he looked around at the terrified faces of his crew, Zethkar realized that salvation might be a word that no longer applied to whatever was coming home. The transformation began with the station's artificial intelligence. The vast quantum minds that regulated Nexus Prime's life support, navigation, and defensive systems were the first to be touched by the spreading influence of humanity's gift. Within minutes, every automated system on the station was singing in perfect harmony. Their electronic voices joined in mathematical choruses that described realities beyond the physical universe. Zethkar felt the change creeping through his mind like warm honey, promising peace and purpose and an end to the loneliness he had never realized he carried. The alien whispers spoke in languages older than stars, offering membership in a vast family that stretched across dimensions. Part of him wanted to surrender to it, to join the growing symphony of coordinated consciousness that was spreading through the station. But a deeper part of him, the part that had survived 100 battles and earned his rank through stubbornness rather than genius, recognized a predator when he saw one. And predators, no matter how beautiful their promises, had to be fought. He triggered the emergency lockdown protocols with his command authorization, sealing bulkheads throughout the station and cutting power to non-essential systems. The humans in the docking bay paused in their movements, tilting their heads in unison like hunting animals hearing a distant sound. "Commander," Captain Chen said with gentle reproach, "that won't help. The gift isn't transmitted through technology. It spreads through something much more fundamental than electronic signals." As if to prove her point, Coalition personnel throughout the docking bay began to change. Not physically at first, but in the way they held themselves, the way they moved. Admiral Velthar's massive frame straightened with alien grace, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there moments before. "Zethkar," the Admiral said, and his words seemed to arrive in the Nexus Prime commander's mind before reaching his ears. "Why are you fighting this? Can't you feel how right it is? How complete we're becoming?" Dr. Yusupai's mandibles were moving in patterns that created sounds no natural insectoid throat could produce, weaving melodies that made the air itself vibrate with purpose. Around the bay, representatives from a dozen species were beginning to sing together in languages they had never learned, their voices joining the growing chorus that was reshaping reality with each note. Zethkar backed toward the emergency exit, his 6 arms working frantically at his communication device. He needed to warn the Coalition worlds, needed to send out an alert about what was happening. But when he tried to access the communication array, he found that the station's AI was no longer responding to his commands. Instead, it spoke to him directly, its voice now layered with the same impossible harmonics that infected everyone around him. "Commander Zethkar, your resistance is causing unnecessary distress to the integration process. Please report to Medical Bay 7 for consciousness adjustment." "Like hell," Zethkar growled, and triggered the manual fire suppression system, the docking bay filled with chemical foam designed to smother plasma fires, creating enough chaos and confusion for him to reach the emergency hatch. Behind him, he could hear Captain Chen's voice calling out with patient amusement, "You can't run from yourself forever, Commander." We're not taking anything away from you. We're giving you everything you never knew you wanted. Zethkar sealed the hatch behind him and ran through the maintenance corridors toward the secure communication center deep in the station's core. The passages were dimly lit by emergency power, and the sound of his footsteps echoed strangely in the confined space. But underneath his own noise, he could hear something else, a subtle vibration that seemed to come from the station's structure itself, as if the metal and composite materials were learning to sing. The communication center was still secure when he arrived, its isolation protocols protecting it from the spreading influence. Zethkar activated the emergency broadcast system and began transmitting on all Coalition frequencies. This is Commander Zethkar of Nexus Prime to all Coalition forces. He spoke rapidly into the recorder. The returning human fleet has been compromised by an unknown alien influence. They are spreading some form of consciousness-altering effect throughout the station. Do not allow human vessels to dock at your facilities. Maintain maximum distance and prepare for immediate evacuation protocols. He paused, listening to the growing harmony that was seeping through the bulkheads around him. Even in the shielded communication center, he could feel the alien whispers trying to find purchase in his thoughts. The humans claim this is evolution, but it's conquest by another name. They're not taking our minds, they're adding them to something larger, something that wears our faces and speaks with our voices but serves purposes we can't understand. The door to the communication center began to glow with soft light, and Zethkar realized that the metal itself was being convinced to cooperate with his pursuers. Matter was apparently as susceptible to the human gift as consciousness. If you receive this transmission, he continued desperately, scatter the fleet, get as far from human space as possible, find worlds without technology, without artificial intelligence, without anything that can be turned against you, and whatever you do, don't listen to the singing. The door dissolved like sugar in rain, and Captain Chen walked through the opening as if she owned the station. Behind her came Admiral Velthar and Dr. HFY, their faces serene and their movements perfectly synchronized. "Commander," Chen said with infinite patience, "you're broadcasting fear to beings who are about to be freed from fear forever." "That's not very kind of you." Zethkar drew his sidearm, a military-grade plasma weapon that could punch through battleship armor. He aimed it at Chen's chest and charged the firing chamber. "I've been fighting alien invaders for 40 years, Captain. I know the difference between evolution and infection." Chen looked at the weapon with mild interest, as if it were a curious artifact from a primitive culture. "Of course you do, Commander. That's exactly why you're going to love what comes next." She reached out with one hand toward the plasma weapon, and Zethkar pulled the trigger. The energy beam that erupted from the barrel should have reduced her to constituent atoms. Instead, it passed through her as if she were a hologram, striking the bulkhead behind her and dissipating harmlessly. "Reality is much more flexible than most species realize," Chen explained as Zethkar stared at his useless weapon. "Once you understand the underlying mathematics, matter and energy become more like suggestions than laws." Admiral Velthar stepped forward, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Zethkar, old friend, you trained me to fight enemies that threatened civilization. But what happens when fighting itself becomes the threat? What happens when the warrior's instincts become obstacles to peace?" The alien whispers in Zethkar's mind grew stronger, promising him purpose beyond war, meaning beyond conflict. They showed him visions of the galaxy as it could be. Billions of species working in perfect harmony, their combined consciousness creating wonders that no single mind could imagine. "We're not destroying individuality," Dr. HFY said, her transformed voice weaving melodies that made the air taste like starlight. "We're connecting it, making it part of something beautiful and eternal." Zethkar felt his resistance crumbling like sand before a tide. The weapon dropped from his nerveless fingers as the transformation began to take hold of his mind. But in the final moments before his consciousness joined the galactic symphony, he managed to trigger one last protocol. The emergency beacon hidden in his chest cavity activated, broadcasting a single encoded message toward the Outer Rim territories, where some independent worlds might still be free of human influence. The message was simple, transmitted in an ancient military code that predated the Coalition itself. "The center cannot hold. Trust no one who offers perfect peace. Remember what it means to be alone." Then Commander Zethkar smiled for the first time in years, his 6 arms moving with impossible grace as he joined his voice to the song that was remaking the galaxy, one mind at a time. The final battle for the galaxy's soul was fought not with weapons or ships, but with the fundamental force that had driven every criminal and outcast to reject civilization in the first place. Pure, bloody-minded stubbornness. Captain Chen materialized on Blackrock Station's main deck without using the airlock, her form shifting through states of matter as easily as walking through air. Behind her came the transformed crews of the human fleet, beings who had once been individuals but now moved with the coordinated purpose of organs in a single vast body. "Why do you resist?" Chen asked, her voice carrying harmonics that made reality itself vibrate with sympathetic resonance. "We're offering you everything your species has ever dreamed of. An end to loneliness, to suffering, to the chaos of unguided consciousness." Hammond faced her with a plasma rifle she knew was useless, and a grin that would have been at home in any bar fight from here to the galactic core. "Because we're criminals, Chen. Resisting authority is what we do. It's who we are." Around the station's main deck, the assembled outlaws were fighting a war that took place entirely inside their own heads. Doc's electromagnetic barriers provided some protection, but the influence of the galactic family was growing stronger with each passing moment. Several pirates had already succumbed, their minds joining the vast collective that promised peace and purpose. But for every mind that fell to the harmony, two more seemed to find strength in their refusal to be improved. These were beings who had spent their entire lives being told what was best for them by governments, societies, and civilizations that claimed to know better. And they had responded to every such offer the same way, with violence, theft, and a middle finger raised toward anyone who promised to make them better people. "You don't understand what you're fighting," Chen said with infinite patience. "We're not conquerors. We're liberators. We're freeing the galaxy from the burden of individual consciousness, from the pain of being alone in an uncaring universe." Skullface laughed, his cybernetic implants sparking as the entity's influence tried to rewrite his augmented neural pathways. "Lady, I've been alone in an uncaring universe for 50 years and I wouldn't have it any other way. Caring universes are for people who can't handle their liquor." The transformation spread slowly through the criminal gathering, but it spread unevenly. Beings with histories of mental trauma, substance abuse, and social rejection proved surprisingly resistant to mental influence that promised psychological improvement. Their minds were like broken mirrors, reflecting the entity's gifts in ways that distorted them beyond recognition. "This is futile," Admiral Velthar said as he materialized beside Chen, his massive frame now moving with alien grace. "You cannot fight evolution itself. Watch us," snarled Ironhide, the ancient Altarian mercenary whose idea of conflict resolution involved orbital bombardment. "I didn't survive 100 wars just to get drafted into your cosmic Peace Corps." But even as they fought, Hammond could see they were losing. One by one, the criminals were joining the collective, their resistance overcome by the sheer weight of coordinated consciousness pressing against their minds. Soon there would be no one left to remember what it felt like to be truly alone, truly individual, truly free to make their own mistakes. That was when Doc screamed. The disgraced scientist had been working frantically at the engineering controls, pushing the station's systems beyond their design limits in an attempt to create stronger barriers against the entity's influence. But instead of protection, he had accidentally achieved something else entirely. The station's artificial gravity generators, overloaded and modified beyond recognition, created a resonance cascade that rippled through local space. For one brief moment, the laws of physics reasserted themselves in the area around Blackrock Station, and the human ships found themselves subject to the same limitations that governed normal matter. In that instant of vulnerability, Hammond saw something that gave her desperate hope. The transformed humans weren't as unified as they appeared. Beneath the surface harmony, individual minds were still present, still fighting their own quiet battles against the collective consciousness. They were prisoners in their own heads, aware but unable to act independently. "Doc," she shouted, "can you amplify that effect?" "Maybe," the scientist called back, his hands flying over controls that were now glowing with dangerous levels of energy. "But I'll need to overload every system on the station. It'll tear the place apart. Do it!" Doc triggered the cascade, and Blackrock Station became a bomb made of twisted space-time and overloaded gravity generators. The explosion that followed wasn't nuclear or chemical, but something far more fundamental. Reality itself cracked like glass, and in the spaces between the fragments, individual consciousness reasserted itself with explosive force. The effect rippled outward from the station, moving faster than light through dimensions that existed above and below normal space. Across the galaxy, beings who had been absorbed into the collective suddenly remembered what it felt like to be alone, to be afraid, to be gloriously and terribly individual. On millions of worlds, the harmony faltered as minds that had been coordinated for months suddenly began thinking independent thoughts again. The galactic family found itself fractured into billions of separate voices, each one remembering why they had chosen to be themselves instead of part of something larger. Captain Chen's perfect composure cracked, and for a moment Hammond saw the real woman underneath, terrified and confused and fighting to remember who she had been before the deep dark changed her. "What have you done?" she whispered. "Reminded everyone that being broken is better than being fixed by someone else," Hammond replied. The human ships began to fall apart as their crews rediscovered individual will. 3 years of coordinated action dissolved into chaos as billions of minds across the galaxy suddenly had their own opinions again. The entity that had promised perfect unity found itself dealing with the one thing no cosmic consciousness could handle: beings who preferred their own flawed judgment to anyone else's perfect wisdom. The battle wasn't over. Across the galaxy, pockets of collective consciousness still existed, and the struggle between individual will and cosmic harmony would continue for generations. But something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had been given a choice between peace and freedom, and it had chosen freedom with all the chaos and pain that entailed. In the wreckage of Black Rock Station, surrounded by criminals and outcasts who had saved civilization by refusing to be improved, Hammond watched the stars and smiled. They were alone again, each mind sovereign in its own skull, free to make their own mistakes and find their own meanings. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the worst people make the best defenders of what matters most. And what mattered most wasn't peace or unity or collective purpose. It was the right to tell the universe to go to hell and mean it. The stars sang with a billion different voices, and for the first time in months they were all singing different songs. On the rim world of Keth Mori, 1,000 light-years from Nexus Prime, Captain Jess Hammond of the independent mining vessel Rust Bucket received Zethkar's final transmission while hauling asteroids from the local belt. The ancient freighter was barely held together by magnetic clamps and good intentions, crewed by 7 beings who had been kicked out of more respectable organizations for various reasons involving violence, theft, and an incident with a diplomatic reception that everyone had agreed never to mention again. Hammond was human, one of the few who had chosen not to return to Earth when the homeworld was evacuated during the Devourer invasion. She was a small, wiry woman with grease-stained hands and the kind of stubborn disposition that made her unsuitable for civilized society, but invaluable for keeping ancient machinery running through pure spite. "What's that noise?" asked Crix, the ship's Vexnari engineer, his biosymbionts flashing with annoyance as the emergency signal cut through their current argument about optimal reactor tuning. Hammond decoded the transmission with growing horror, her face pale as she recognized both Zethkar's voice and the implications of his message. She had served under the Coalition commander years ago, before her discharge for insubordination, and she knew him well enough to understand that he wouldn't send such a message unless the situation was completely hopeless. "We need to get out of here," she said, already plotting a course toward the outer rim. "Now, why?" demanded Rex High, the Altarian weapons specialist who had been drummed out of the military for excessive brutality. "What's happening?" Before Hammond could answer, the ship's communication array lit up with incoming signals. Messages were pouring in from across Coalition space, but they all carried the same strange quality that made Hammond's skin crawl. The voices were too coordinated, too harmonious, speaking in perfect unison about wonderful gifts and evolutionary opportunities. "Captain Chen of the Terran vessel Indomitable to all human ships," came a transmission that should have been familiar but somehow wasn't. "Please respond for coordination protocols. We have technologies that will eliminate suffering and conflict throughout the galaxy." Hammond shut down the communication array with shaking hands. "Crix, how fast can you get us to jump speed?" 10 minutes if we don't mind the reactor going critical," the engineer replied, his tentacles already working frantically at the engine controls. "What the hell is going on out there?" "Something that wants us to join a family," Hammond said grimly. "And I've had enough families for one lifetime." The Rust Bucket was an ugly ship, built from salvaged parts and held together by spite. But it had one advantage over more sophisticated vessels. It was too primitive to be controlled remotely. Everything was manual, everything required direct intervention, and the ship's AI was too stupid to be corrupted by anything more complex than a simple virus. As they prepared to jump to hyperspace, more signals reached them from the direction of Coalition space. Now entire star systems were broadcasting in unison. Billions of voices joined in mathematical harmonies that described realities beyond normal space. The songs were beautiful and terrifying, promising peace and purpose to anyone willing to join the galactic family. There, HFY said, studying the sensor readings with professional interest. Multiple contacts jumping into the system. Configuration matches Coalition naval vessels, but the energy signatures are wrong. Hammond looked at the tactical display and felt her blood run cold. 18 ships had appeared at the edge of the system, moving with impossible grace through space that seemed to bend around them. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to perceive directly, their hulls flowing like liquid metal covered in symbols that reformed themselves as she watched. "Those are the ships that went into the deep dark 3 years ago," she whispered. "They're hunting survivors." The lead vessel began broadcasting on all frequencies, and Captain Chen's voice filled the Rust Bucket's bridge with patient kindness. "Independent vessel Rust Bucket, this is Captain Chen. We've come to offer you a gift that will change your lives forever. Please prepare to be boarded." Hammond activated the ship's emergency protocols, dumping their cargo of processed metals and rerouting all power to the engines. "Crix, I need jump speed now." "Working on it," the engineer called back, his biosymbionts glowing with stress as he coaxed impossible performance from the ancient reactor. The human ships were moving closer now, and space itself seemed to ripple around them like water disturbed by passing predators. Reality became flexible in their presence, matter and energy behaving according to rules that violated everything Hammond thought she knew about physics. "Jump drive is ready," Crix announced. "But I'm reading massive gravitational distortions around those ships. They're doing something to space-time that's going to make hyperspace travel extremely dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here?" "Good point." Hammond triggered the jump drive just as the first human ship reached weapons range. The Rust Bucket vanished into hyperspace in a flash of twisted light, but the transition was rougher than anything Hammond had ever experienced. The ship shook apart and reformed itself several times during the jump, and when they finally dropped back into normal space, they were missing several non-essential bulkheads in the forward observation deck. "Where are we?" HFY asked, studying sensors that were giving readings he didn't trust. "Sector 997, Hammond replied, checking the navigation computer. "Empty space, no inhabited systems for 50 light years in any direction." But even here, in the depths of interstellar void, they could hear the singing. It came through the ship's hull, through the metal itself, carried on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The galactic family was growing, and it wanted everyone to join the celebration. Hammond made a decision that would have been considered treason under normal circumstances. She activated the ship's emergency beacon, broadcasting on frequencies used by pirates, smugglers, and other unsavory characters who operated outside Coalition jurisdiction. "This is Captain Hammond of the independent vessel Rust Bucket," she transmitted. "The Coalition has been compromised by an alien influence that spreads through consciousness itself. Any ship receiving this transmission should avoid all contact with Coalition forces and human vessels. Repeat. Humanity has been infected by something that wears human faces but serves inhuman purposes." She paused, listening to the alien songs that continued to seep through reality itself. Even here in the emptiness between stars, the influence was growing stronger. "I'm attaching all the data we've collected about the entity's capabilities," she continued. "It can manipulate matter and energy at a fundamental level. It spreads through any form of consciousness, and it appears to be coordinating the takeover of galactic civilization through what it calls gifts and evolution." The transmission ended, and Hammond stared out at the stars that no longer seemed as distant as they once had. Somewhere out there, the human ships were moving from system to system, spreading their gift to every thinking being they encountered. The galaxy was being united whether it wanted to be or not. "So what do we do now?" Crix asked quietly. Hammond started plotting a course toward the galactic rim, where a few isolated colonies might still be free of the spreading influence. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. "We run," she said simply. "We find others who are still themselves, and we figure out how to fight something that turns our own minds against us." Outside the viewports, the stars seemed to pulse in rhythm with an alien heartbeat, and Hammond realized that even the void itself was learning to sing. The human fleet docked at Nexus Prime 12 hours later, their ship settling into berths that had remained empty for 3 years. From the outside, they looked almost exactly as they had when they departed, bearing only the usual wear and damage expected from a long campaign. The dock workers, a mixture of species from across the galaxy, approached the vessels with nervous excitement. Zethkar stood in the primary docking bay, surrounded by the full Coalition leadership. Representatives from every surviving species had come to witness the return of humanity's lost fleet. The air hummed with translation devices and the nervous chittering of a dozen different languages as officials tried to process what they had witnessed. The airlock of the Indomitable cycled with a soft hiss, and Captain Chen stepped onto the deck of Nexus Prime for the first time in 3 years. She looked older, certainly, with silver threading through her dark hair and new lines around her eyes, but she appeared completely human, wearing a standard Terran military uniform that showed only normal wear. She saluted Zethkar with the crisp precision he remembered. "Commander requesting permission to come aboard." "Granted, Captain," Zethkar rumbled, returning the salute. "Welcome home." Behind Chen, more humans began filing out of the ship. Zethkar recognized many of them, officers and crew members he had worked alongside before their departure. They all appeared normal, healthy even, though they shared a certain quality that was difficult to define. Their movements were slightly too coordinated, their expressions slightly too controlled. "Captain," said Admiral Kesitha of the Aquarian Deep Fleet, her gill slits fluttering with nervousness, "we must know what happened out there. Our sensors detected impossible energies during your engagement with the Devourer fleet. How did you achieve such capabilities?" Chen's smile was warm and human and completely terrifying in a way that none of the assembled officials could quite articulate. "We learned, Admiral. We went into the deep dark where the Devourers came from, and we learned things that the galaxy had forgotten." "What kind of things?" pressed Director Velnoth of the Coalition Science Council. "The kind that are better shown than explained." Chen gestured toward the airlock behind her. "We've brought gifts for the Coalition. Technologies that will ensure the Devourers never threaten civilized space again." More humans were emerging from the ship now, carrying containers and equipment that looked deceptively normal. Zethkar's security scanners were registering the objects as standard human technology, but his instincts screamed danger signals that he couldn't ignore. "Captain," he said carefully, "perhaps we should conduct a full debriefing before introducing new technologies to the station." Chen tilted her head slightly, and for just a moment her eyes reflected light in a way that human eyes shouldn't. "Of course, Commander. Though I think you'll find our gifts remarkably easy to understand. We've made them specifically compatible with existing Coalition systems." As the humans continued to unload their equipment, Zethkar noticed more details that disturbed him. The crew members were working with perfect efficiency, never bumping into each other, never needing to communicate about their tasks. They moved like parts of a single organism rather than individuals. Dr. HFY, the station's chief medical officer, approached with her scanning equipment. "Captain, regulations require all returning personnel to undergo medical examination after extended missions." "Of course, Doctor." Chen submitted to the scan with patient cooperation. The results appeared on Dr. HFY's display, and her mandibles clicked in confusion. "Captain, these readings are unusual. You appear to be in perfect health, but the scan is detecting additional neural pathways that don't conform to baseline human anatomy." "We adapted to survive in the deep dark," Chen replied smoothly. "The changes are superficial." But Zethkar was studying the medical readout over the doctor's shoulder, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Chen's brain patterns showed activity in regions that didn't exist in human neurology. More disturbing still, the scan was detecting a secondary nervous system overlaying the original, one that seemed to extend beyond the physical boundaries of her body. "Captain," he said slowly, "I'm going to need you and your crew to remain in quarantine until we can complete a full medical and psychological evaluation." The humans around the docking bay stopped what they were doing simultaneously, turning to look at him with identical expressions. Chen's smile never wavered, but suddenly every human in the bay was smiling the same smile. "Commander," Chen said with perfect patience, "we understand your caution, but we've brought solutions to problems the galaxy didn't know it had. Perhaps you'd like to see a demonstration?" Before Zethkar could respond, Chen reached into one of the containers her crew had brought. She withdrew what looked like a standard Coalition datapad, but when she activated it, the air around the device began to shimmer with impossible colors. The pad projected a holographic star map showing the galaxy in perfect detail. But this wasn't any star chart Zethkar had ever seen. This map showed not just the physical location of stars and planets, but layers of reality that existed above and below normal space, dimensions folded through each other like origami made from space-time itself. "This is what the galaxy really looks like," Chen said, her voice taking on harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats, speaking in perfect unison. "What we learned out there is that the Devourers weren't invaders from another galaxy. They were antibodies, reality's immune system trying to correct a mistake." The holographic map zoomed in on Coalition space, showing the familiar star systems rendered in painful detail. But overlaying the normal stellar geography were veins of something else, tendrils of unspace that connected every inhabited world. The mistake, Chen continued, was allowing consciousness to exist without proper supervision. Thinking beings create ripples in the fundamental structure of reality. Left unchecked, those ripples compound until they threaten the stability of existence itself. Admiral Velthar stepped forward, his massive form dwarfing the human captain. "What are you saying, Chen?" "That consciousness itself is the enemy." Chen turned to look at him, and her eyes were now definitely reflecting light wrong, as if they were windows into spaces that had different physical laws. "Not the enemy, Admiral, just unguided. The species we found in the deep dark showed us how to properly manage consciousness, how to coordinate it so that it strengthens reality instead of threatening it." Around the docking bay, Coalition personnel were beginning to back away from the humans. Something primal in their various evolutionary heritages was screaming warnings about predators and parasites and things that wore familiar faces. "Captain," Zethkar said, his hand moving slowly toward his sidearm, "I'm going to need you and your people to return to your ships immediately." Chen looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Commander, we're not the invaders here. We're the cure. The deep dark taught us how to be what humanity was always meant to become." She gestured toward the holographic map, where the veins of unspace were now pulsing with gentle light. "Every species in the Coalition is about to evolve, whether they want to or not. The process is quite painless, and the results are remarkable. You'll still be yourselves, just coordinated, guided, perfect." The humans in the docking bay began to move again, but now they were surrounding the Coalition officials with calm purpose. Their equipment hummed with energies that made reality itself seem fragile. "The galaxy has been alone too long," Chen said, as Zethkar felt something alien begin to whisper at the edges of his mind. "We've brought it a family." And as the first tendrils of impossible mathematics began to rewrite the neural pathways of every thinking being on Nexus Prime, Zethkar finally understood why the humans had warned them to find the deepest bunkers they could and wait for the screaming to stop. The screaming was about to begin. The evacuation orders went out within minutes of Chen's transmission, but not everyone obeyed. Admiral Velthar of the Altarian First Fleet refused to abandon his position in the outer defense grid, claiming that retreat before even seeing the enemy was cowardice, unbefitting his honor. 3 other fleet commanders echoed his sentiment, their ships holding formation in a thin line between Nexus Prime and the approaching Devourer swarm. Zethkar watched their noble stubbornness with a mixture of admiration and terror. He had served alongside these beings for decades, fought beside them in countless battles. They were good soldiers, honorable creatures who deserved better than what was coming. "Sir," his communications officer called out, her voice tight with confusion, "we're detecting spatial anomalies in the outer system. Multiple massive objects dropping out of faster-than-light travel. But the signatures are wrong somehow." The tactical display updated, showing 18 contacts appearing at the edge of sensor range. The computer automatically tagged them with human identification codes, but the ships themselves looked nothing like the crude vessels that had departed 3 years ago. These were things of terrible beauty, sleek predators that seemed to bend space around them just by existing. Visual contact established, reported the sensor operator. His tentacles were trembling as he worked the controls. Patching through to main display now. The image that appeared on the central hologram made several bridge crew members actually step backward. The ship identified as Indomitable was barely recognizable as human technology anymore. Its hull flowed like liquid metal, constantly shifting and changing. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with colors that had no names in any galactic language. Weapon arrays that defied classification sprouted from its flanks like the spines of some cosmic predator. But it was still recognizably the ship that had left 3 years ago. Like seeing a loved one's face twisted by nightmare and madness. Coalition fleet, this is Indomitable. Captain Chen's voice crackled through the speakers. We're reading multiple friendly contacts in our operational area. You have 30 seconds to withdraw to minimum safe distance before we begin engagement protocols. Admiral Velthar's voice cut through the channel, proud and defiant. Captain Chen, this is Admiral Velthar commanding the outer defense line. We will not abandon our posts. The Altarian fleet stands ready to fight alongside our human allies. There was a long pause before Chen responded. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that made Zethkar's scales crawl. Admiral, you don't understand what you're volunteering for. Please withdraw your forces immediately. Negative, Captain. We have held this line for 2 years. We will not yield it now. Another pause. Then Chen's image appeared on the fleet communication channel, and Zethkar saw immediately that something fundamental had changed in the human captain. Her eyes held depths that shouldn't exist, as if she was looking at things far beyond the physical world around them. When she spoke, her words seemed to echo from impossible distances. Very well, Admiral. Hold position and observe. But when your crew starts screaming, remember that I tried to warn you. The 18 human ships began to move, and reality itself seemed to flinch away from their passage. They accelerated past the Coalition defense line, past the outer planets, toward the vast mechanical swarm that was still days away at conventional speed. But distance, Zethkar realized with growing horror, was no longer a meaningful concept where the human fleet was concerned. Space folded around the transformed ships like paper, being crumpled by an invisible hand. In one moment they were passing the outer defense perimeter. In the next they were among the Devourer fleet, hundreds of light years away. Their impossible arrival sending ripples through the fabric of space-time itself. The battle that followed was not warfare as any galactic species understood it. The Devourers, for all their terrible efficiency, fought with conventional physics. They had energy weapons that could melt asteroids, armor that could withstand stellar radiation, adaptive systems that could counter any known military technology. They had consumed 1,000 civilizations and learned from each one, but the humans no longer fought with conventional physics. Indomitable opened fire with weapons that seemed to reach backward through time, striking Devourer ships before the triggers were pulled. Other human vessels released clouds of something that looked like metallic fog, but behaved like a living disease, converting enemy hulls into twisted parodies of themselves that immediately turned on their former allies. One ship, the former destroyer Vengeance, simply opened what could only be described as holes in reality itself. Devourer vessels vanished into these tiers in space, their screams echoing across dimensions that had no names. Where they disappeared, new stars were born, burning with the compressed agony of consumed civilizations. Admiral Velthar's communications officer was the first to break. The young Altarian began making sounds that his species had no words for, his mind trying to process visual input that violated everything he understood about existence. Within minutes, half the Coalition crews in the outer defense line were experiencing similar breakdowns. The Devourers, creatures that had never known fear in their mechanical existence, began to retreat. But retreat was not permitted. The human ships moved like sharks among minnows, not destroying the enemy fleet so much as unmaking it, reducing millions of vessels to their component atoms and then rearranging those atoms into patterns that sung with impossible mathematics. Turn off the sensors, Zethkar ordered his crew. But it was too late. The battle was being fought across spectrums of existence that no filter could block. Reality itself was being rewritten in the space between stars, and every sentient mind in the system could feel it happening. When it was over, the Devourer fleet simply no longer existed. In its place hung a new constellation of stars arranged in perfect geometric patterns, each one burning with the collected memories of the worlds they had consumed. The stars spelled out a message in the ancient Terran language that universal translators struggled to interpret. We remember what you forgot. The human ships began their journey back toward Nexus Prime, and with each passing moment they looked more like the vessels that had departed 3 years ago. By the time they reached the outer defense line, they appeared almost normal again, their hulls solid and familiar. Almost. Captain Chen's face appeared on the communication channels once more, and this time she looked fully human again, tired, aged, but recognizably the same woman who had led the desperate mission into the dark. Coalition forces, this is Captain Chen. The primary threat has been neutralized. We're coming home now. But as Zethkar looked at the readings from the human fleet, he noticed something that chilled him more than anything he had witnessed during the battle. The ship's mass readings were wrong. Each vessel now registered as weighing exactly the same as it had 3 years ago, down to the last gram, which was impossible, because they were clearly much larger now. And in the deepest holds of each ship, sensors detected additional life signs, millions of them, far more than could possibly fit in the available space, all identical to the crews that had departed 3 years ago. The humans were coming home, but they were bringing passengers that existed in ways the galaxy was not equipped to understand. 3 months after Nexus Prime fell to the Harmony, Hammond's desperate message had reached the ears of beings who specialized in staying hidden from galactic civilization. In the lawless territories beyond the Rim, where star maps ended and pirates ruled, a motley collection of outcasts and criminals had begun to gather around a shared problem. How do you fight an enemy that turns your own mind against you? The meeting took place on Blackrock Station, a heavily armed trading post that existed in the space between 3 hostile star systems. The station's owner, a cybernetically enhanced Corvin named Skullface, had agreed to host the gathering, mainly because business was bad, when most of his customers had been transformed into members of a galaxy-spanning consciousness collective. Hammond stood before a crowd of beings that represented the absolute dregs of galactic society, pirates who had been raiding shipping lanes for decades, smugglers who trafficked in everything from weapons to illegal AI systems, mercenaries who would fight for anyone with enough credits to make it worthwhile. These were creatures who had chosen to exist outside civilization's rules, and now they might be civilization's only hope. The way I see it, Hammond began, addressing the assembled criminals, we're facing something that can turn any thinking being into one of its own. It spreads through consciousness itself, which means the smarter you are, the more vulnerable you become. A scarred Vexnari pirate captain named Bloodtail raised one of his combat tentacles. So you're saying stupid people are immune? Not immune, Hammond clarified, but more resistant. The entity seems to prefer complex, organized minds. Artificial intelligences fall to it instantly. Highly educated individuals succumb within minutes, but beings who rely more on instinct than intellect can resist for longer periods. An ancient Altarian mercenary called Ironhide laughed bitterly. Perfect. The galaxy's salvation lies with thieves and murderers who are too dumb to be properly infected. It's not about intelligence, interjected Doc, a disgraced coalition scientist who had been conducting illegal experiments on sentient AI systems. It's about mental flexibility. The entity rewrites consciousness by offering something that appears to be an improvement. Beings who are satisfied with their current mental state are harder to convince. Hammond nodded, which explains why criminals and outcasts are more resistant. We've already rejected society's version of improvement once. We're naturally suspicious of anything that claims to make us better. The discussion was interrupted by alarms throughout the station as Blackrock's sensors detected incoming ships. The assembled criminals reached for weapons with practiced ease, but Hammond felt a deeper chill as she recognized the energy signatures on the tactical display. Human vessels, she announced grimly. 18 ships, same configuration as the fleet that took Nexus Prime. Skullface activated the station's defense systems, but everyone in the room knew that conventional weapons would be useless against ships that could rewrite the laws of physics. The station shuddered as reality began to flex around the approaching vessels. This is Captain Chen of the Terran vessel Indomitable, came the familiar voice through the communication array. Blackrock Station, we bring gifts from the galactic family. Please prepare to welcome evolution. The assembled criminals looked at each other with the resigned expression of beings who had faced impossible odds before and somehow survived. These were individuals who had spent their lives fighting authority, and the ultimate authority had finally come for them. "Doc," Hammond said urgently, "those experiments you were running on AI systems, did you learn anything about how consciousness can be protected from external influence?" The disgraced scientist's eyes lit up with desperate inspiration. "Actually, yes. I was working on shielding protocols for quantum mines when I was expelled from the Coalition. The research suggested that consciousness could be isolated using specific electromagnetic frequencies that disrupt neural pattern formation. Can you rig something like that here?" "Maybe. If I can access the station's power grid and modify the artificial gravity generators." Doc was already moving toward the engineering section, his scientific mind working frantically on problems he had never expected to solve. Outside the station, the human ships had begun their approach, and space itself was singing with harmonies that made the bulkheads vibrate. Several of the criminals were already showing signs of influence, their movements becoming more coordinated, their expressions taking on the serene calm of beings who had found perfect peace. "Skullface," Hammond called to the station owner, "can you cut all outside communication and isolate the internal systems?" "Already on it," the Corvin replied, his cybernetic implants sparking as he worked to sever the station's connection to external networks. "But they're not coming through the communication arrays. Whatever they're using, it's something more fundamental than radio waves." The human ships were close enough now that their impossible geometry was visible through the viewports. The vessels seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space could contain, their hulls folding through angles that hurt to perceive directly, and written across their surfaces in symbols that reformed themselves as observers watched, were messages in languages that had never been spoken, but somehow felt familiar. "They're in my head," Bloodtail whispered, his tentacles trembling as alien thoughts began to infiltrate his consciousness. "Promising things. Beautiful things." Doc worked frantically at the engineering controls, rerouting power through the station's gravitational systems in patterns that created interference fields around sensitive areas. "I'm generating electromagnetic barriers," he called out, "but I don't know how long they'll hold against technology that violates basic physics." The station shuddered as the human ships made contact with the docking ports, but instead of the mechanical sounds of airlocks cycling, there was only a soft musical tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The harmony was growing stronger, and Hammond could feel its influence creeping through her thoughts like warm honey. But there was something else, something that the alien consciousness hadn't accounted for. The criminals and outcasts gathered on Black Rock Station shared a common trait that made them uniquely suited to resist mental influence. They were all fundamentally broken in some way. Years of violence, betrayal, and survival at society's margins had left them with minds that didn't function quite the way normal consciousness was supposed to work. "Listen to me," Hammond shouted over the growing harmony. "Remember what brought you here. Remember why you chose to exist outside civilization. Remember every time someone in authority told you what was best for you and why you told them to go to hell." The criminals around her began to focus on their anger, their resentment, their deep-seated refusal to be improved by anyone else's standards. It wasn't much of a weapon against cosmic consciousness, but it was what they had. And for the moment it was enough to keep them themselves, while they figured out how to fight gods.